It's another episode of the Ranting Cast. I'm your host, Frank R. Curry. Ranting Ron is behind the scenes doing all the producer work. We have Adam Kierszenblat. He is with us today. He's a Vancouver and Seattle Kraken writer for the Hockey Writers. He also has a podcast called the Third Line Podcast, which covers a lot of junior hockey, which you don't really see many junior hockey podcasts. So, Adam, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you guys for having me.
So, real quick before we get going into like any like Vancouver and Seattle talks, I got plenty of questions for that. I want to talk really quick about the podcast. What made you start doing a junior hockey podcast, and just promote that a little bit.
Well, before joining the Hockey Writers, I was writing for a WHL-based site. There were a couple of the writers who kind of got together, and we all wanted to do a podcast. So it does focus a lot on junior hockey, but we do talk, hockey in general, and it's just kind of grown. We did take the summer off, but we're back. We have some exciting player interviews coming up. One of the guys that we interviewed a couple of years ago after he was drafted, Tyson Kozak, Buffalo Sabres prospect, Portland Winterhawk. So we've gotten that opportunity to talk to a lot of the WHL prospects, and like I said, we have a lot of fun stuff planned over the junior hockey season, which starts in 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, hockey training camp is literally just starting tomorrow too, and now you got junior hockey the season starting. As you said, in a couple of days, and I'm glad you mentioned Tyson Kozak because he's been getting a lot of talk recently. He played really well at the prospect challenge for the Sabres, and he's getting a lot. The coaching staffs for Buffalo has been hyping him up a lot as like a Swiss Army knife kind of, or a unicorn type player. That he's going to be that once he's in the AHL, he's going to be a dream for their head coach Seth Appert. So really, really cool to see. I love the idea of just like the junior podcast that kind of focuses a lot on what's going on in the world of junior hockey, because I love junior hockey so much. Being here in Buffalo, it's primarily the OHL that I'm watching, but I've been hoping and advocating for a junior hockey team to be in Buffalo for so long. I don't know if it'll work because, with how dominant the Sabres are and obviously the Bills too. I just don't know if it's possible, but I want a junior hockey team because I want more hockey games to go to. I love junior hockey. I love the speed of it. I love the competitiveness. I love the passion that those kids bring. It brings like a college atmosphere, and I love college sports. So I kind of associate the two together because I love college hockey too. I'm huge on college hockey and junior hockey. So having more of that, especially in this area for me, would just be a dream, and hopefully would be more of an inspiration for a lot of kids here who, maybe they don't see players who they could become, in that area. So it's at least cool to see. Let's get right going with everything. You talk Vancouver Canucks, you talk Seattle Kraken for the Hockey Writers. How did you get started there, and how did you get going with two teams? Because I know a lot of people who write for the Hockey Writers really only cover one team, but you cover two.
Well, I live in Vancouver, so when the opportunity came up with the Hockey Writers, they had a full Vancouver Canuck team, but I wanted to get in and get that opportunity to write for the Hockey Writers because they are such an established brand. And that was the year that the Seattle Kraken had entered the league. So we were still in that summer. It was before the expansion draft. And I had a choice of a couple teams, but I said, you know what? I'm only about 2 hours away from the Seattle Kraken. We get Seattle radio up here a lot of the time. So let's jump in with the Seattle Kraken and see what happens. And then as I progressed, they offered an opportunity to cover a second team. And I said, well, I always wanted to cover the Vancouver Canucks, so let's do that. Let's jump in there. And it's been an adventure so far, covering two teams. Obviously, I watched the Canucks, as you can tell by the giant Canuck flag behind you. But, making that time to also watch the Kraken, follow the Kraken, look at those analytics. And then it also helps a little bit because now instead of saying I'm comparing, the Canuck defense to each other, now I have another team to compare them to. And especially because they're rivals or potential rivals, if the Kraken can find a way to actually beat Vancouver this year, it was a opportunity I couldn't pass up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a lot of work too for you, as to have to cover two teams. That's why when I see covering the Seattle Kraken and Vancouver Canucks on your Twitter bio, I'm just thinking that's a lot that he's putting on his plate already. And you co-host the podcast as well. And then also too the number one when you cover the Vancouver Giants, the WHL. So like that's a lot on your plate that you're putting on there, and you know you obviously are up for the challenge. So it's been going well, at least so far, that you're still doing it. So that's at least really cool to see. So Vancouver can. Let's start with Vancouver since you're based in Vancouver. You got the Vancouver flag. I love it. By the way, it's awesome. I always love that logo for the Canucks. They had a real interesting summer, I'll say. And it obviously started at the beginning of last season where they fired Travis Green at probably a lot later than I think I think the fan base wanted them to, but they did it. Um, they fired Jim Benning as well. And then Patrick Alvin takes over as GM, but also Jim Rutherford came in as president of hockey ops. And then they hire Bruce Boudreau as their head coach after they fire Travis Green. And when Boudreau came in, they were one of the best teams in the league. Completely turned around from where they were. They were going from losing every game to almost winning every game. They were, I mean, if Boudreau had coached the full season, Vancouver would have made the playoffs, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think he was in the top 10. The Canucks as a team were in the top 10 after he took over for records. But yeah, you talk about it. It was a very interesting season to say the least in Vancouver because coming into this year, there was a lot of pressure on the fact that Jim Benning had been here for so long. Benning, a former part of the Sabres organization
Mm-hmm.
as well. There were a lot of people who wanted him out. It just kind of added and added and added to the point where it exploded and somebody threw a jersey onto the ice. That's
Mm-hmm.
it got so bad that the fans kind of forced their hand. And thankfully, one of the Canuck legends, Stan Smeel, the story is that he went to the owner, Francesco Aquilini, and said, enough is enough. We need a change. So, Stan Smeel, I think, deserves a lot of credit, definitely for the Canucks coming or the change that happened here in Vancouver. But you look at Travis Green as well. People put blame on Green because the system wasn't working and everything. They didn't have a good enough team. It's just simple. They haven't had a good enough team for the last couple of years. The bubble year was a blip. We all know that. There were a lot of problematic personnel decisions when it came to who was re-signed, who was let go. But now it's a fresh start. We've had about 6 months or so of 6 to 8 months of Rutherford and Alvin with their team of Emily Castonguay, Derek Clancy, and Cami Granado. So we're starting to see this team come together, and there's a lot more optimism going into the season, especially with the way that Boudreau plays his game and or plays his teams and makes them their game plan. But also just the fact that he's a PR dream. Whether it's him in talking to Kevin Owens of the WWE at the NHL
Oh my
draft,
god,
which became just one of that was a huge moment for the Canucks PR
that was
that they
super
got
cool.
that. Yeah, some of the stuff that he's been saying going into training camp, he's such a lovable guy. There were even Bruce There It Is chants at the Canucks
Yeah.
prospect tournament this year, and he's not even coaching. So, there's a different vibe this year, and it feels like instead of there being pressure, which there was at the beginning of last year on Travis Green, it's more of a we have confidence in Boudreau, and this year is going to be a lot different. Even though we've been saying it's going to be a lot different the last couple of years, this year is going to be different.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, throughout the summer, we were seeing a lot of rumors and trade rumors going around. Even then, we were going into the last summer as well, summer 2021. They trade for Connor Garland, and then almost a year later, it's like now he's in the trade rumors again. They trade for Oliver Ekman Larson, and then he's still on that massive contract. They signed Tucker Poolman to a 4-year contract, and I mean that really hasn't worked out so far. And I think he's injured right now anyway, so he might even start an LTIR. I'm not sure about that. But then Brock Besser has been constantly in the trade rumors. So has JT Miller, and then JT Miller just got an extension, an $8 million extension. So what's has the Canucks gotten a change of heart with potentially trading all these guys, or obviously they must have had a change of heart with JT Miller and Brock Besser, considering Besser got an extension, but Connor Garland, I mean, he hasn't been moved, and then they slipped through sign Bo Horvat, who's their captain, to an extension. He's up at this is last season under contract. So so really, like, what is Vancouver's plan? I guess is the biggest question to ask.
Well, what Vancouver has done, it looks like, is that they're focusing on the forward group, and then they're going to build the defense later. That's not necessarily the best plan, but we'll see if it works, because they do have problems on the right side of their defense, especially. Tucker Poolman, he has some migraine issues, which are very serious. So we'll see what happens with training camp. The word out of Canuck camp is that he's good to go for the year, but we'll see what happens. We all thought that Marco Furland was good to go. He came back, played, I think it was 1 game, and then hasn't played since and has retired. That was concussion related. You look at the right side, their top defender is Tyler Myers, who I believe he was on the Buffalo Sabres the last time they made the playoffs. So that should, that
shows you how long it's been.
Yeah. And then you got Luke Shen on that right side, who, yep. I mean, how can you hate Luke Shen? So we'll really see what happens with this right side. Connor Garland is a guy definitely in trade rumor because he probably has the most value to get that right side defense sorted. But the name that we keep hearing out here in Vancouver is Ethan Bear. Western Canadian kid, played for the Oilers, now plays for Carolina. Carolina brought in Brent Burns, so there's not a lot of room there for him anymore. Could Connor Garland be a fit in Carolina, especially with Matt Pacioretty out for long-term injury? And yeah, we'll just see. The JT Miller extension, I'm not a huge fan of it just because it's so long, and his age does play a factor in there. He's not the best when it comes to defensive play, but let's be real. He put up 99 points last year in 80 games. The Canucks were obviously going to focus on re-signing him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's kind of we were told about Trader Jim, as in Trader Jim Rutherford, when he came in, as a guy who would make like a trade a month when he was with the Pittsburgh organization. I think that's what the average came out to. And since he's come to Vancouver, it's been Patient Jim. So we're kind of in that holding pattern of let's see what happens over the next couple of weeks. They're going to have to make some decisions for sure, which should lead to some trades or at least some waiver claims.
It's interesting. I mean, JT Miller's contract is 7 years, $8 million a year, and this is a contract that's going to kick in when he's 30. So I can understand why it's not maybe one that you would want to do. We saw earlier in the summer, obviously we saw the crazy Matthew Tkachuk trade. Calgary gets, Mackenzie Weegar, Jonathan Huberdeau, and now Huberdeau, who's also going to turn 30, is going to gets an 8-year extension from Calgary, gets $10.5 million. So it's just, I don't know. If they were going to trade JT Miller, I think they would have done it all. I think they probably would have done it at last year's deadline. Personally, I think when he didn't get traded, it kind of says maybe they're going to keep him, but you still had the draft as well that you could have dealt him. And there was that rumor too of him going to the Islanders, and it just never happened because it got leaked.
Yeah, so this is we don't really know what happened. And this is a Lou Lamoriello special where it is supposedly if you talk about a deal, it doesn't get done. So the rumored are was that somehow the Canucks were going to get a first round pick. I think it was the first round pick that the Islanders traded to Montreal for Alex Robinoff. That
Yes.
was kind of what they were looking at with JT Miller. But it's one of those, unless you were in the room, you don't know what happened type situations. But we kept hearing about the New York Rangers all year with JT Miller, the big name. They wanted Braden Schneider. That was a name that the Rangers weren't going to move. We kept hearing about Niels Lundqvist. He recently moved to Dallas.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, they didn't get what they wanted. So they decided to keep the 99-point player instead.
Yeah. I can understand that. Obviously, especially if you're going to get a point a game production out of him, you hope at least. It's funny how Lundqvist just gets traded from the Rangers to Dallas, and and the Rangers get a first round pick for him too. So you kind of wonder what that trade would have looked like had Miller gone to the Rangers and maybe Lundqvist, or the Rangers do trade Schneider. It probably would have been one of those guys plus another pick. I don't know. Just give me 1 second. I'm still getting over a little cold right now. We were supposed to have you on yesterday, and then my cold really got to me, so I'm trying to keep myself hydrated, and I'm still kind of sneezing and coughing all over the place.
Yeah, and that, you were talking about that Lundqvist trade. It wasn't just a first round pick. There was also a fourth round pick added in, which I believe if Lundqvist gets 55 points over the next 2 years, that turns into a third round pick. So that's a very high price to pay for a defenseman who was constantly getting scratched in the New York Rangers lineup.
Not only that, what a condition that is. I don't think I've ever seen a condition where if a player gets a certain amount of points, then the draft pick becomes higher. That's creative. That's creativity, and I've never seen that before. And I'm surprised that a GM like Jim Neal would do that.
Yeah, because we constantly see he has to play 75% of the playoff games, or it's usually game related, but we rarely do see the points clause in there.
Yeah, Vancouver also signed Ilya Mikheyev in the offseason too, so he's going to bring a lot of speed up until that middle six of the lineup. He got a 4-year deal. Another winger to add to the Vancouver's forward core as well. I thought that was a very interesting signing too. Maybe that was kind of where I thought maybe they are trading Garland in that case. You mentioned about Vancouver's defense, how really Tyler Myers is their top pairing right shot D. I heard something that Quinn Hughes is going to move to the right side.
So Quinn Hughes won't move to the right side permanently, but the plan is that Quinn Hughes will play on the right side in offensive situations. So what that means is that if the Canucks have a face-off with in whatever situation, you can play Quinn Hughes and Oliver Ekman-Larsson together. And Ekman-Larsson will take the left side. Quinn Hughes will take the right side. Okay. He's a very, one of the most skilled defenders in the league. And the idea of playing him on the right side in the offensive zone is that you get a little bit more shot variation from him. So he'll be able to shoot the puck more when he's on the right side. He'll be able to make better passes, all of that type of stuff. But in the defensive zone, the plan is Luke Schenn next to Quinn Hughes.
We'll see how they're able to deploy that in Vancouver. Also, too, you also have Travis Dermott, who they traded for from Toronto, who could also play the right side. So that kind of helps you diverse the D pairings a little bit. We're gonna take a break. Tonight's show, obviously, it's always brought to you by John and Mary's and Dinosaur Barbecue. They still got that pick your own combo going on. Pork, ribs, brisket, sausage, chicken. We can add more chicken to it. Shrimp, pick 2 for $22. Pick 3, $27. We got a drawing coming up. That's going to be October 15th. We'll talk more about it as we keep going along. But tonight's show, as I just said, John and Mary's Dinosaur Barbecue. Check those out. We will be right back. Adam Kierszenblat joins us today. We've been talking some Vancouver Canucks stuff with their offseason, but he's also someone who covers the Seattle Kraken. So let's talk a little bit about the Seattle Kraken as well. Entering year two, really interesting team, I think, going into this season. Dave Hackstall, Ron Francis entering year two with the organization, everything, obviously. They draft Shane Wright. Surprisingly, fourth overall, Shane Wright goes to Seattle, which I think that took a lot of us by surprise. Um, they have Matthew Beniers as well, and then they have a lot of options up front at least. So starting at least up with the forward core. I mean, what are you seeing out of Seattle so far? And do you think maybe they're primed to make a little noise this season? I'm not saying make the playoffs, but be more competitive.
So I think that Seattle is going to finish just outside the playoff bar. I actually think that they're going to finish with a better record than Vegas, which I know a lot of people disagree with. But Vegas has no goaltending, so that will be interesting. But you talk about Wright. I have to give credit to my co-Kraken writer here at the Hockey Writers, Sean Raggio. He wrote a Kraken target piece about Shane Wright right before the draft. He kept telling me, I don't know, I have a feeling that Shane Wright is going to go to the Kraken. So, yeah, he nailed it on the head. But
Yeah.
we enter into an interesting situation with Shane Wright. Now, it's obvious that he has the skill to make that transition. We saw it in the OHL last year. I don't know how much will be gained by him going to back to the OHL next year, but like because he's kind of skilled out of that league. He can't go to the AHL,
Yep.
so you're in the situation where you need to be careful. He can't play on the fourth line. That's a given. You can't put Shane Wright on the fourth line.
Yeah.
We saw what happened with the Rangers with Capo Caco. Like, you have to give this guy opportunities, or else it could be devastating to their development. So I see Shane Wright and Matty Beniers as kind of a 1-2 combo, and then you have what I would call you have two sets of wingers. So you have James Schwartz and Jordan Eberle, and then you have Andre Burakovsky and Oliver Bjorkstrand.
Yep.
And then what you can do is you can kind of switch those. So you keep the wingers together, and then you can kind of move the centers around whatever way you want. I think that Beniers is going to start with Eberle and Schwartz because, Hackstall did start him last year with Schwartz, or with Eberle. Schwartz was injured. But you need to put him with stable guys. And you have a good third line of Jared McCann, Yanni Gordon, potentially Brandon Tanev. Like, that's a pretty good shutdown line right there. And then there's a lot of questions about the fourth line. Morgan, like guys like Morgan Geekie, Jonas Donskoy, Ryan Donato, Alex Wenberg. These aren't fourth line players, but there's no room anywhere else. So do they go with a more scoring fourth line with guys like Wenberg and Geekie, or do they put in a guy like Ryan Donato and Jonas Donskoy and make more of a checking fourth line?
Yeah, that's the part that that has kind of puzzled me about Seattle's offseason is they focus so heavily on the forward core that they're really not they're giving themselves too many options in a way. I kind of figured that their top three centers would be Beniers, Wright, and Gord. Maybe McCann too, because I like McCann a lot. Excuse me. Still getting over that cold, but and then you mentioned Wenberg and Donskoy and Geeky, and then Tanev, who's coming off a torn ACL. So who knows like how effective he can be when it does come back. It's very curious to see how they mix and match it up. And then on defense, I mean, it's gonna primarily be the same. They added Justin Schultz in the offseason. So he kind of takes the place of who is it, Giordano in the lineup, I guess. But he's also a right shot guy, and you have Alexiak, Dunn, Larson. Right now, I'm looking on the cap friendly at least. They have Carson Soucy, Will Borgen, former Sabre, as their top six, and then nobody else really who can come up, I guess, except for Cale Fleury, which again is another guy who was there last season. So they didn't really do much on defense, at least. And then goaltending is I think the biggest question mark because Drieger had a bad knee injury. So who knows if he's going to even be available. And they signed Martin Jones to kind of be that insurance for that. And Phil Grubauer, who statistically was the worst starting goaltender in the league last season. And I get goalies are voodoo. It doesn't feel like they really insured themselves in net that much. So when you make that prediction of Seattle will be better than Vancouver because of their goaltending, I'm thinking Seattle might be behind Vancouver because of their goaltending too. But it could go either way, realistically, just because of how voodoo goaltender is. Grubauer could come back and be, at the very least, an average goalie, and Seattle could miss the playoffs by 5 points because of it.
Yeah. So my understanding is that Chris Streeter is done for the year.
Yeah.
Or pretty close to it. Yeah, like you're basically running with Grubauer and Martin Jones, two goalies who had statistically their worst seasons in the NHL, and you're banking on that. And then as you talk about the defense, yeah, the big change was that they got rid of Giordano at the trade deadline to Toronto last year. And that basically allows them to move Carson Soucy back to the left side, which is his strong side. And you put in Justin Schultz, who doesn't really make sense for the way that this team has built. But, he's a stopgap. I think they brought him in to help Vince Dunn on the power play so that Vince Dunn can kind of learn from somebody who knows how to play the power play. As we know, Justin Schultz, tremendously gifted offensive defenseman. He's become a little bit more stable in his defensive zone over the last couple of years. But, yeah, they have – when you talk about who they can bring up, you look at guys like Michael Kempney will probably start as the seventh defenseman. The big talk around Seattle is Riker Evans, the second-round pick from the 2021 draft. According to Ron Francis, that's a guy that they really like and that they're going to give every opportunity for him to be in that opening night roster. I think that if you only bring him up if he's going to play. You don't sit him on the bench or in the press box because that's just pointless. Put him down in the Coachella Valley Firebirds, let him learn the game. But Riker Evans is going to be the big one to watch. The thing about Riker Evans is that he played with Regina with Connor Bedard. So his numbers, if you look at his numbers, there is a massive jump from when he was playing with Bedard and when he wasn't playing with Bedard. So it's going to be was this a Connor Bedard affected player? Mm-hmm. As in, we all know Bedard is a generational player. He's the first ever WHL player to get exceptional status. So I don't think that there's much argument that he makes everybody around him better. Was that the case with Riker Evans, or is there something more to his game? Outside of that, you talked about Cale Fleury. There's not a lot in the system. If they get some major injuries, like I'm talking Adam Larson goes down, it will be interesting to see what they do because they really don't have a guy, especially on the right side, that can step up and play 25 minutes again. On the left side, you can make a case that you got Dunn, Alexiak, and Soucy, and all of those guys can step up. But on the right side, I'm not really. Look, Will Bogdan is a great defenseman. Not really interested in seeing him play 20 minutes a game in a shutdown.
Yeah, I mean, former Sabre, so we kind of know what he's about. We always liked him, but we never really liked him that much as well. It's interesting. I mean, going into the draft, you mentioned one of your colleagues thinking, I think they're going to get right at 4. I really thought that they were going to get Simone Nemec at 4. I thought, that was just personal for me. I thought Wright was going to go 1 to Montreal. I wouldn't have been surprised if Slafkovsky went 2 to New Jersey and then Cooley went 3 to Arizona. That was kind of my thought going in, and then Nemec goes 4 to Seattle. If they had gotten him, though, I mean, forward-wise, they make the same moves. I think they would have been fine in there. It kind of less diversifies what they can do forward, but then it really gives them that perennial number 1 defenseman that they they do need. And it's obviously hard to get, especially a right-sided, right shot one, first top pairing defenseman. But they would have gotten a guy like that. I mean, that would have been a dream. I think dream for Seattle. So I really wonder if that's going to be a position of focus for the Kraken going forward.
Yeah. For the record, I'm a big David Jiricek fan.
Mhm.
That would have been my pick. But you talk about like Arizona, that Logan, they were set on Logan Cooley. They had Shane Wright sitting there, and they said no. They're going all Logan Cooley all the time. So that was an interesting one to watch. But yeah, like right shot defensemen are so hard to get. We talked about Lundqvist. Look
Yep.
at the overpay that you have to get a right shot defenseman. You look at like uh yeah, Nemec is going to be a top 4 defenseman in this league.
Mm-hmm.
He would have really helped, and I think that if they drafted Nemec, it would have made got their forward group make a little bit more sense, because then you could have had like a Wenberg or a Geeky in that second line spot. Now, the fact that they got right, I think it kind of messed up their thinking of how they were going to run their forward group. And the fact that they got not Burakovsky, Bjorkstrand, I
Yep.
think that just threw everything out the window as well. Like,
Yeah, getting Bjorkstrand, I thought really put them over the top with messing up their forward core. But at the same time, I can't. That's a guy you don't really pass up on. I was surprised. I'm not surprised Columbus traded him because they had to trade a cap guy. You know, they signed Goudreau, they re-signed Line, and then so they had to kind of cut bait with a guy with a bigger contract. So Bjorkstrand ended up being the guy, but he's a really good player. Really I like it. Really like his analytics. And Seattle gets him at a relatively cheap cost too. I mean, you can't pass that up, and it gives them, you know, if you look on paper, it could be a really top end wing group for their top 6 going into the season. That and having these top, these really good wingers will help bring along their young centers in Beniers and Wright going forward. So I can definitely see the logic in it. Now it's just a matter of getting them all on the ice and having it work out.
yeah, exactly. I was actually that morning I had reached out to another colleague at the Hockey Writers, covers Columbus, because I was in the process of writing an article about how the Kraken should use their cap space to go after a guy like Jakub Voracek. And then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden the Bjorkstrand trade comes out of nowhere. So it was definitely an interesting time, and that shows the power of cap space right there.
Yep.
That you didn't have to give up a first round pick to get Bjorkstrand, who's essentially a 30 goal scorer at the NHL level.
Yeah, it shows just when you have the cap space. I mean, it's that whole idea of weaponizing your cap space in a way. You're using what you had. You're using the available money to have to get a player who's going to help you, and you're getting something. And sometimes teams will do it, and they'll be a third party in a trade, and they'll get a draft pick out of it, or they'll use it to get a guy who's going to help you now, and you don't have to give up a lot to get him, and that's exactly what Seattle did. I'm just going to take a real quick look. They only gave up a third and a fourth for Bjorkstrand. That's a great deal. That's a deal you take any day of the week. Well, Adam, thank you for coming on. This has been great. Great talking with you. Plug all your stuff. Plug where the people can find you.
Well, you can find me over at the Hockey Writers. Got some Kraken stuff coming up, Canuck stuff as well. And then on the podcast side, we do have a Kraken-based podcast called What's Kraken on the Hockey Writers Network. And then, of course, the Third Line podcast as part of the Area 51 Sports Network. That one, we're covering all things junior and some Seattle Kraken and Vancouver-based stuff as well. And we got some pretty good guests lined up for the season.
Awesome to hear, Adam. Thank you for coming on. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam K. Black. Right on your screen, right where you see his, on the bottom left of your screen, right where you see his face. Like I said, thank you for coming on. This has been great. We should definitely talk again, especially maybe when Buffalo and Seattle and Buffalo Vancouver play each other.
Yeah, expansion cousins anytime.
All right, Adam. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll see you the next time on the Ranting Cast.